Twin Towers were a source of amazement for me. They were going to be the tallest buildings in the world.
They were among the most iconic, structures in New York.
They were a signature of America's economic strength and political power.
Anybody would see that silhouette and know it was New York.
Put up a picture of the Twin Towers anywhere, and somebody in that population would recognize it. New York City, USA.
I started as a young photographer photographing the construction of the buildings.
I kind of grew up when they were being built. I watched them grow, as I was growing.
I remember whenever I'd come to the city, or if I were over in New Jersey landing at Newark, you'd look up and you'd see the towers. And they were just always a symbol of New York, a place you could look at to orient yourself and to reassure yourself that the most vibrant and vital city in the world was still where it should be, doing what it should do.
Until 9/11, I think many Americans didn't quite understand what it represented, not just for the economic vibrancy of New York City, but for the economic vibrancy and health of the country as a whole, and indeed the world economy was in many important ways centered in Lower Manhattan. It was a symbol of American economic and financial strength.
I was working at the YMCA in Southbridge, Massachusetts. You and Anthony were in the daycare, and we all went running to a TV to see what was going on, and we didn't know what it was about. When it hit the first towers, we thought it was a plane crash, and then, I don't know, was it 25 minutes later, and the second plane hit the second tower.
On 9/11, I was teaching in a self-contained special ed classroom in Berlin, Connecticut, and the one word I think was horror, because first of all, what happened, but also my husband was in the city on the Jersey side and could actually see it from the meeting he was in. So it was pretty, I think horror would be a good word that, I could describe that day.
Well, if I remember correctly, I was in 5th grade, and it was like a really nice day out. Like, the sky was like really blue, and I remember just like sitting in my class in the morning, just like really like tired, and then all of a sudden like the teacher just like put the news on, and there's just like one word I could describe it as was just like confusion, really. Like, no one really knew what was going on. We just saw like on the TV like all the smoke and everything, and people are just asking the teacher what was happening, and I think after a while he just turned it off because it was too much. And just confusion, just wondering what was happening, why. None of us really comprehended what was really going on, but we knew something terrible had happened. It was just a weird, eerie day.
On the morning of 9/11, I was getting ready to actually take a trip to New York City, where I had a meeting in the Twin Towers with Cantor Fitzgerald. When my wife mentioned that some plane hit the building, I was already into the car and got out and went back into the house. And when I watched what had happened, at the same time, the second plane hit the building. So my first response, being in the military, was a statement called DEFCON 5, which was an extreme emergency.
Well, I think he was angry and wanted to attack American interests, and I think he felt that attacking the Twin Towers would do things to us economically and make us suffer. I think there were probably warning signs that we weren't aware of or didn't see as warning signs at the time. And so I definitely think maybe it could have been prevented.
I think the biggest warning sign happened a few years later when the Trade Center got bombed, essentially. And then just the U.S. being in the Middle East and being involved in certain things that he didn't really like. But I do believe that there were warning signs beforehand.
I don't know very much about why he attacked the U.S., but there probably was some warning signs because of maybe threats being made by him and the group, the terrorist group, or anything like that.
Well, I don't know much about the whole history behind it. I do think that we sold Osama bin Laden weapons. And, I know there's a bunch of anti-American hatred, and we definitely knew about it, and we didn't see it really coming, but we had an idea that that there could have been an attack. But I'm not sure if it could have really been prevented. I mean, even if they didn't use planes or anything, they could have done something else that we just, I don't know. We really didn't have as much of a focus on terrorism at that point, so I mean, it was kind of inevitable in a way.
Well, there were warning signs for quite so many years, even with the prior attack on the Twin Towers years earlier. But, it's like an onion. It's layered very deep, and most roads point back to Al-Qaeda, which, he had played a significant part in.
The CIA was tipped earlier, I know, because they had recordings, but they didn't know when exactly the attack would be, so there was definitely warning signs, but I feel it was inevitable because of the massive scale of air travel in the United States. And like any other terrorist plot, it's always political. There's, the surface it says it's religious, but it's generally all for political motivation. He wanted more control in the region, so.
I think it's actually made it more negative for them. And when I went to high school, that was the first time I really got involved with people that weren't just white people. When I went to school in Hartford, and I went to school where it was really small, white people were the minority, and there was a lot of Muslims, there was a lot of black kids, there was a lot of Hispanic kids. So being able to kind of meet all of them and really just see how nice everyone is, and Muslims do unfortunately get the bad rep of being terrorists and all that kind of stuff, and most of the time they're just all really nice people like everyone else.
I think it's definitely not good for them in this country. I mean, just look at all the anti-Muslim attitudes now with Trump as president. I mean, that's pretty much a result of 9/11. I mean, people. It's easy to blame them for the whole violent attitude of the minority that make up terrorist groups. It's easy to blame one group, even though just a minority of them really feel that way. But it definitely has not helped their reputation in America, unfortunately. I don't know. I don't know how. I hope we can fix it eventually, but.
There's always been a perception of people from the Middle East as a little uneasy, I guess you could say, even dating back to Soviet era when they were invaded by Afghanistan. There was just mass immigration. Just since the region's always at war, people always seem to have this idea that they're very violent people, and in reality, they're probably one of the more peaceful. It's just, in the United States, we like to find a person to blame, and it just so happens that majority of terrorist attacks, well, what we claim to have been terrorist attacks, like there have been a lot of white terrorism, but we don't consider those terrorist attacks. But generally, we point the finger at Muslims instead of any other people because they're the easiest to point the finger at.
I think right after the 9/11 attacks, the perception was very poor. Hardworking Muslims that had come to this country and were working very hard and, owned businesses were often attacked and treated very poorly by the public. There was a lot of nationalism or a lot of pride that was, brought up, and so people started to fly flags and do all kinds of things. So I think that it really, the perception, I think that was one of the times where the perception of the Muslim people might have been poor at that time. And so rather than, say, oh, they've been my neighbor, they're a good businessman forever and ever, people started to go, oh, they're horrible. And that kind of, tends to shape history. So.
Well, I remember back then, back when we announced the war, I remember people seemed more enthusiastic about it, especially when you're a kid. It seems more simple. Yeah, we're gonna go to war and fight the bad guys. But looking back at it now, I feel I don't know. I feel that war really could have been avoided. You can't really just completely wipe out a terrorist group just by going to war with a country. And now, of course, the motives are even more unclear because it wasn't the best response really. And especially how now everyone always talks about how there's a post 9/11 era really of just paranoia and fear, and ever since then it's just been people have just been more on edge, and I guess that helps prevent future terrorist attacks because people are on alert more. But there's still so much that happens in the news nowadays, all the bombings and everything. I mean, I don't know, how do you prevent something completely like that? But we're definitely more on alert now, so that's something.
The response was probably pretty good. Again, we all came together as Americans to be proud and to mourn those who were lost. But I think we're maybe a little safer, maybe only because of what happens at airports now. We have much more security, much more, I guess, things that we have to go through to get on a plane, to travel and that sort of thing. So I think a lot has changed since then, and I think that we might be safer, but we really have to look for those warning signs, and I think on one hand we're safer, on the other we could be headed for very difficult times when it comes to fighting this war on terror, because we're still fighting it, and it's been since 9/11. It was a long time ago, so definitely we've got our work cut out for us.
Well, I think it was a big wake-up call, but there always is political reaction to any event, and just like any tragedy, when something like that happens, you know, it brings the best out in people. So change should be positive, but there's always negative sides to change also. I think that every day that goes by that there isn't an attack is one day closer to one happening.